Every generation grapples with the one that went before it and the one that's emerging. But Jesus is who frees us, yesterday, today, and forever. Today on The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stoutland. The late 60s, early 70s Jesus movement brought about a collision between generations and opened the doors to the divisions inside the church. Though it wasn't an easy process and didn't happen overnight, it changed church culture at the time. Now here we are once again in our politically, racially, and religious divided society. A new film, Jesus Revolution, captures the counterculture movement of that era. Today, Andy Erwin of the Erwin brothers is here. Andy's brother John speaks of being on set for the baptism scene on the beach of the Pacific Ocean when extras and an actor made a decision right then and there to be baptized. And so moves the Holy Spirit.
We're glad you're with us today on The Perspective. Mike Sherbino here and Julie Stoutland. Julie, when I watch that clip of the movie, it just makes my heart thump because as a preacher, it's a picture of lives being changed. And I just want to say this right out of the gate, as you're watching today, it's not too late for Jesus to do a miracle in your life. And I hope you'll be open to that. In a moment, we're going to be talking with Andrew Erwin, who is one of the producers, along with his brother John, of the Jesus Revolution. Exciting movie that, well, we're going to talk about what it's all about. It's going to take us back to the 70s. You know, 70s, Julie, that's when we had the VW vans that were all painted. Did you ever have one of those?
I was a little kid.
Okay, sure. Okay. Well, hey, you know what? I'm not going to say what I was at that point. So let's just bring Andrew on right now. We're going to chat with him. Andrew, thanks for being with us and putting up with our nonsense. We appreciate it.
I love it, Mike and Julie. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And it's so exciting to talk about this story because just this moment in time, it's been so amazing to see this story connect with a whole new generation.
Well, and that's part of the interesting thing, isn't it? Because we've been talking a lot on the program about the Asbury revival and the breakout and what's happening with college students. And suddenly, in a God moment, your movie shows up. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, people kept asking if we had anything to do with the Asbury revival. I'm like, we're not that smart. Like, God just was already up to something. And, you know, we had planned to release this movie and make it a couple years ago, and it tried, and COVID prevented that from happening. But when it came out, we were kind of gearing up towards the release, and we started hearing rumors of the Asbury revival. The most interesting thing is the story that we tell of this hippie revolution. It happened on the West Coast in the early 70s, and it happened at Asbury College 50 years ago. So for the fact that come full circle and be happening again, it's a God moment that we're not smart enough to kind of engineer. We just came alongside and, you know, helped tell a story God was already telling.
You know, it kind of makes the hairs go up on my arm when I think about that. That's so neat. Listen, you know, we live in a skeptical era, especially among Christian denominations. And of course, all art forms have their critics. Art is subjective. The film has been praised in Christian media, but not so much with secular media. The critics say it's marketing. How do you respond, or how do you not read the critics?
The way that we don't read the critics is we make the product for the audience. You know, the aggregate site Rotten Tomatoes, it's a 99% with the audience right now. It got an A+ cinema score. And that means that there's a group of people that are voting with their movie tickets, and their movie tickets are being heard loud and clear by the industry. So it doesn't matter what, you know, certain people, you know, think of it from a critical eye, as long as we're connecting with that audience. And it's been exciting to tell a story about, I mean, to have a major motion picture studio like Lionsgate release a film about mass baptisms and a nationwide revival in the 70s with Jesus literally in the title. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so it's because people have voted with their tickets and the studios are listening.
So
I know, it's amazing.
Take us back a little bit. And how did the thought come together? We're going to produce this. Who was behind that? What were the things that you decided you needed to show or not to show? What was the big idea?
Yeah, Mike, we did a movie about 8 years ago called Woodlawn, and Woodlawn was a football story that told the story of a school in Birmingham, Alabama in the early 70s that had gone through a massive amount of racial tension in the last part of integration in the South. and this spiritual awakening hit the school. That spiritual awakening was the Jesus Revolution in the
Mm.
70s. And it was the tail end that hit the school. And as we got to the end of that movie, my brother found a magazine cover for Time magazine, and on the cover, it had a portrait of a painting of Jesus, and it said the Jesus Revolution. And then he went back 3 years earlier, and the cover of Time magazine was an all-black cover that had the words, "Is God dead?" So he just said,
I
in those
remember
3
that
years
one. I
between those
remember that
two,
one. Yeah.
yeah, if people remember that one. And 3 years later, Jesus was on the cover. So he just began to say, what in the world actually happened in those 3 to 4 years? And so he dug into it, and he just said, we have to tell the rest of the story. And so it really was birthed out of that, to kind of go back it up. And it was this story of these kids that had been sold a bill of goods of what they thought was going to fulfill their life. They weren't bad kids going searching for bad things. They were kids that were looking for truth. They were looking for God, but they were told that it was drugs that was going to unlock their mind. And when the bottom fell out, God met them in that place, and there was a sweeping move of God's Spirit that was just, nobody knows how it started. It just did. And these kids that were called freaks became Jesus freaks. And then that made its way down the coast and found this church in Costa Mesa, California, and a pastor whose church was dying named Chuck Smith. And this hippie evangelist, Lonnie Frisbee, met Chuck Smith, and it was nitro meets glycerin, and it was an explosion of God's Spirit.
And so here's a question and I want to come back and talk more of the story. As a producer, do you think bringing Jesus' message to the big screen loses some of its holiness away? You know, the cinematography is spectacular, and the film looks and feels like a Hollywood blockbuster. But the setting of the 70s Jesus movement, can it really truly be captured?
I mean, you can't, it's not a photograph of what happened. You know, we paint portraits. You know, it's an artistic representation of what people experience. But I think the reason why we tell true stories, and the reason why we're reclaiming ground in the theater, is we're about evangelism. We're about kind of taking the timeless truth of the Bible and translating it into a way that a generation can understand. And the reason why we choose true stories is the Bible says that they overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the power of their testimony. And so there's just power in somebody's personal story of what they lived. So what we try to do is get as close to an accurate portrait of what people actually went through. Now, again, to live it in real time is much different than what you can even hope to capture with a camera. But I think it's enough of a moment and a feeling that it captures an audience. And you just see, like I saw the other day, somebody sent me a video. I don't even know where it was from, but there was a theater full of teenagers that as soon as the movie ended, somebody had brought their guitar and it turned into a praise and worship kind of revival.
That is so cool.
In the theater.
Wow.
So I think as Christians, we're reclaiming ground rather than just kind of abdicating and saying that's not what we do. We're reclaiming enemy territory for the gospel. And it's amazing to see what God's doing.
Well, and I was just going to go on with my next question saying, of course, Jesus isn't a building, but a personal relationship. He freed us, those who love him once and for all. And all of us are works in progress. So I want to ask, how do you compare today's division with that of the 60s and 70s movement?
It's, you know, Julie, it's so similar. It's eerily similar. You know, because I think you see a generation, there's such a generational disconnect from the old guard and the old generation from the young. I think that very similar to the 60s, you have a generation that's young that is looking for something that's true and something that's real. They're just looking for it in the wrong places. I mean, the hippies, you know, they desired the same thing of justice and love, this free love kind of thing that they wanted, and truth and to belong and identity. They were just looking for it in a counterculture movement that promised them that it was going to come through drugs and, you know, sex and rock and roll. And this generation, I think, is very much looking for those same things. They're just looking for it in different causes to belong to, and social media and all these things that are just a bottomless pit. So I think there's a hunger for something real. And then I think there's an older generation that doesn't know how to connect. And I think the desire of a film like this is to start a conversation where an older generation that lived through the 70s and lived through this movement can say, remember who you were, remember what you did, remember what God did. And for a younger generation to kind of inspire them to imagine and say, look at what, you know, dream of what you could be. And there's a conversation to have in the middle there.
I love that.
Well, Andrew, I just want to thank you for what you've been talking about. I got a lot of other questions we want to unpack. So hang there with us, and our viewers, don't go away. We're going to touch on more when we come right back after this short break.
You've probably noticed we have some guests here today. I'd like you to meet my new friends. Welcome.
They don't belong here. Half of them aren't even wearing shoes. They're staining the new shag carpet.
They need our help. If you feel like you're misunderstood and judged, you will find forgiveness and freedom right here.
That was awesome.
Now that door is open any time of day. And if there are some who don't like that, well then that door works both ways.
All right, Pastor, let's begin.
I was almost done with this, but then you did what nobody else would even dare.
This thing that we found, I feel like I belong.
You're gonna need a bigger church.
Our country is a dark and divided place, but now there's hope, and it's spreading.
This is your home, and I want you to tell all your friends about it.
Well, there's definitely some great scenes there from the Jesus Revolution film. And then we're talking with Andrew. You know, the characters in this movie were so well cast, and I saw some clips from Kelsey Grammer on other shows sharing his involvement in the movie. And I saw how he got really emotional many times. What was it like to work with Kelsey and so many other amazing cast members?
Yeah, Julia, it was such an amazing cast. And the people that kind of got assembled, starting with Kelsey. So for this Chuck Smith character, and Mike, I know you'll appreciate this as a pastor, it was just a really authentic human look at that struggle to do what his calling was, but figure out, what God was calling him to do for his generation. And that human struggle of him embracing things that and people that he didn't think were reachable. And Kelsey, had been, wanting to kind of grow in his faith. And he said that he was out on the back porch of his house having kind of a moment of kind of prayerful reflection. And he just kind of said a quiet prayer and said, I want to do something with my life that matters. And the next day, the script for Jesus Revolution arrived on his front doorstep from his agent.
The next day?
And the next day. And he called his wife and he said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm going to do this movie.
Awesome.
And the clip that you're talking about where he got emotional, he was on one of the New York talk shows, and he started tearing up, and he said, after seeing it and watching it with my family, it's the most beautiful thing that I've done. It's the most personal thing that I've done. And it really deepened his faith in a whole new way. And it was so exciting to see him really embrace this character that has a lot of humor to it and a lot of heart. And I just think he was perfect for it. And then on the other side of the table was Jonathan Rumi from The Chosen playing Lonnie Frisbee, this hippie evangelist. And a lot of people love The Chosen. I love The Chosen. And to have Jesus playing this kind of Jesus-esque, hippie evangelist, those two men were really great.
It was perfect. Great. Yeah, it was perfect.
So as you're telling that, we've been fortunate to have a number of The Chosen come on the program and talk about their own journey of faith. And you're talking about Kelsey. This seemed to be a very pivotal moment in launching him in a new direction. Is that a fair assessment?
It really was. And he and Greg Laurie, Greg is one of the in this story was a 16-year-old teenager that was on the front lines of seeing this go on, that was struggling with drugs and really kind of burned out, and then found Jesus. So Greg Laurie in real life is an amazing pastor evangelist. I know he's a friend of the show. Greg invited Kelsey to come promote the film at his Harvest Crusade at Angel Stadium last summer. And Kelsey not only came to promote it and spoke from the stage, but he stayed for the message. And it made a profound impact. And he and Greg actually became really close friends. And I think he's gone to church several times at Riverside at their campus since then. So I know it really deepened his belief and his trust in Jesus. And he kind of came boldly out in the campaign of this movie and said, Jesus has made a huge impact in my life. So we don't always cast Christians. We want to cast the best actor for the role. But it's so beautiful when somebody is at that moment in time. And so we experienced the same thing with Dennis Quaid, and I can only imagine it was a similar moment for him and his spiritual journey. When it can connect the dots like that, it's so exciting.
I want to jump in and say, tell us about the experience, about the baptism, filming it, And then realizing that some of these people were really meaning it and they were acting, but
it was pretty powerful that day. So my brother John directed it with Brent McCorkle, and they were directing a scene on the beach, and there's this kind of sacred ground where it actually happened in California called Pirates Cove. And it's where the rock cliff kind of carves out this natural kind of almost like something from the set of the Goonies kind of alcove. And they would have these mass baptisms there. So we did it in the same place that it was done originally. And that was really my brother pushing that we can't just recreate this. This has to be really where it happened. So they're out in the water. They've got hundreds of extras. And Greg Laurie is there on the shore. And Kelsey Grammer's baptizing some, and Jonathan Rumi is baptizing others. Jonathan comes up to Greg and he's like, "Hey, Greg, can you train me how to do this for real? Because some of these people really want to be baptized and I don't want to screw this up." And so it was a moment. And one of the other things that happened is there's a character played in the film that plays one of the supporting characters that's a Vietnam vet. That there's a pivotal scene where he comes into the room in a wheelchair and says, I'm addicted to drugs. I'm going to die. I need somebody to help me. And they pray over him, and then he comes to know Christ. Well, the scene when they did the baptisms, they brought him out there. Let me tell you a little bit of the backstory on that guy. So the actor's name is Shawn Weiss, and he was in a Disney movie growing up that I grew up on as a kid called The Mighty Ducks. It was a hockey movie.
There you go.
And so he played the goalie, Goldberg, the goalie. Well, after he got done with that as a kid, he fell into drugs in a bad way. And he ended up being very addicted to meth and being on the streets of Los Angeles as a homeless man. Wow. And in the process of us casting the movie, he had started talking about trying to get sober and had gotten checked into rehab, and his story had hit social media. Lionsgate and our bosses that aren't people of faith particularly, they called us and said, "Hey, this is kind of one of the people you're trying to reach in your story. What if you put him in the movie?" So John and Brent loved the idea. They brought him in and said, "I want it." When we got to the baptism scene, he went up to Greg Laurie, and Shawn said, "This has made such an impact on me. I want to make this decision for real. Can you lead me through how to make this decision mine and then baptize me for real?" So right before he's baptized in the movie, he became a Christian and got baptized for real. Wow. It was amazing. It was chills.
I'm smiling about that story because I remember planting a church on the East Coast, and it's too long to go into details, but the guy who was the night cleaner in the building we were renting, he came and I said to him, "Any chance that you play bass?" And he said, "Can you tell me how to have one of these relationships with God?" And he came on the Sunday, he heard me play, and he said, "Man, you need help." And so then he said, can I bring my whole band next week to help you out? And none of them knew Jesus, wild people. And a year later, they led worship with me for a year. And then a year to the date, they all gave their lives to Jesus. And it was just a moving moment. And you're sharing that story. Yeah. I hope our listeners are listening in. God is still moving, isn't he? He's doing miraculous things, even through the big screen. Yeah. And I just find so much hope in that.
I love it. I love it.
I love that, Mike. I think the most amazing thing we have to share with a curious and disillusioned world is the power of what God has done in our personal journey. Mm-hmm. And that's the stories that we tell. Those are the stories that we go after. And we try to tell it the best way we know how in order to be able to really connect with introducing a curious world to Jesus. And then it allows for pastors to step in the gap and to fill in the gaps and say, "Let me tell you the rest of the story." We just create a moment where their guard goes down. They have an emotional experience with a story. And then the church does what the church is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And that's connect them to the rest of the story. And so it's exciting to see God doing what he does.
It sure is.
Andrew, thanks for being with us. I hope you come back. Bring the whole crew next time, and we can swap stories.
You guys are too much fun. You guys are too much fun. I love it. Mike, Julie, you're the best.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
For those of us who follow Jesus, we have a book. It isn't a theology book. It isn't a rule book. This book is a story. The story of God and humanity. A story Jesus said he was fulfilling. This book contains poems, riddles, letters, puzzling narratives, and new ideas. Yet, throughout it all, this book is full of the breath of God. For those of us who follow Jesus, this book is a treasure. This book is a tree of life This book is a page turner. Turn the page with us.
You know, what I love about that little clip we just watched is that it's talking about the importance of God's word. And if you've ever struggled with life, I want to just invite you to go to God's word. It has the answers. And we think of Jesus' revolution and what was really happening. People were looking for answers, and it's the same book back then that we have today. And that's what's transforming people's lives. It's the truth in the book.
I love the fact that there's so much chaos going on back then, in politically, culturally, and that.
A little bit of chaos now, too.
Well, that's the point, right? So you fast forward, and here we are at this point again where it seems like there's been so much chaos, and what happens? There's this breakthrough. I just think that's incredible, and God's timing is always perfect. And I love the fact that how Kelsey prayed that he wanted to do something really meaningful, and the next day he gets the script. Isn't that incredible?
Well, God is the God of divine coincidences. And I've discovered, Julie, that the more you pray, the more divine coincidences you see. Because our lives get lined up with him. And what a powerful story of the fellow in the wheelchair.
Oh, I love that.
Who'd been in that, what was the movie, The Mighty Ducks or something?
Yes,
I remember that
one. He played the goalie.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to play goalie. I wanted to be center. But apart from all of that, you know, just to see there was a transformation coming and it became real in his life. And my heart today for each of you as you're watching is that you will know the transformation that Christ can bring in your life. This is not Hollywood. It's not glitz and glamour. It's about people encountering Jesus. And right now, I believe he's speaking to you. Why don't you open your heart up to him and just say, Jesus, come in today. We've been talking about the Jesus revolution, and I'm going to tell you something that will bring a revolution in any house. It's called kids. You know, kids can turn things upside down. They can bring joy. They can bring sorrow. They can bring a whole interesting perspective on life. For the next several episodes, I want to teach about one of those kids. Actually, he was a twin. His name is Jacob. You know, when you think about twins, I was reading recently about George Clooney when he discovered at the age of 56 that his wife was having twins. He said he was terrified. I can understand that. I think I would ask a good friend to shoot me and put me out of my misery if it was me. But you know, the man in the story here, his name is Isaac, and he discovers at the age of 60 that he's having twins. And we know the story that the two twins, one was Esau and the other was Jacob. And they were born. I want to read to you from the passage that talks about their birth. It says, when the time came to give birth, Rebekah, the mother, discovered that she indeed was having twins. And the first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair, like a fur coat. And so they named him Esau. And then the other twin was born, kind of looking just the opposite, smooth skin, with his hand, though, grasping Esau's heel. And so they named him Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. Now, they named him Jacob, but Jacob really could have had many other names. And what started out at birth when he was given the name of Jacob, which means grabbing by the heel, is that Jacob, unfortunately, lived out that name. He could have changed the rhetoric. He could have changed the narrative if he had been listening to God. God is patient throughout his life, but it's not until the end of his life that he actually gets back in alignment with where God had intended him to live all along. Jacob actually could have been called the grabber. Maybe that would have been more appropriate. He also could have been known as the opportunist, taking advantage of people, and in particular, his brother. He could have been known as the dreamer and schemer. And then at the end of his life, we see Jacob as the desperado. When he gets to the point where he can't contain it, he can't manipulate people, he can't manipulate God, and he becomes desperate to have an encounter with God. Let's back up for a moment. And I want to ask you, what is the name that you're living out? What is the name that you go by? Well, you might be Fred or Jim or Sally or June. It doesn't really matter. But what do people know you as? God calls us to live with an interesting posture. We all want to be successful, don't we? And God's posture for success is in surrendering and not striving, always trying to get ahead. And Jacob was that person. He was trying to climb the ladder to success. He was trying to outdo technically his older twin brother, because he popped out first. But there he was, grabbing and clutching. And could it be that you're going through life grabbing or clutching? You see, Jacob's story is not one that we applaud and say, oh, wow, this is a bestseller, let's read it. No, it's a story that is marked with pain and anguish. And the people that Jacob brought into the sphere of his life, they suffered immensely as well because of the behavior that he lived out. But Jacob's story is also an opportunity for us to see God's story. We see the character of God being revealed in the way that he deals with Jacob. And that gives me hope. Because frankly, folks, as much as I don't want to admit it, there are parts of Jacob's character that I see in me, and likely they're in you as well. But in the backdrop, we see God being patient, being willing to wait for Jacob to come around, saying, you don't have to go that way. You don't have to always strive. You don't have to always do it in your strength. He's saying, Jacob, will you trust me? But Jacob chooses to say often the token words, but then he pulls back. And in pulling back, he hardens himself until finally God brings him to the place of breaking. We're going to come to that in a few days' time. But let me read a quote by the well-known Latin American evangelist Luis Palau. He said, Jacob was a man that was blinded by his confidence in his own natural abilities. But no matter how confident you may be, the judgment of God goes on. You can't play games with God. You may think you can, and all of us do, until God touches us and breaks us. And it's when he breaks us that then we are able to become the men, the women that he wants us to be. I'm not sure of what it is you're living with, what you're struggling with, what you're going through. But I want you to know this, that as you surrender your situation to God and stop striving in your strength to always get ahead, to manipulate things, to address things in your way, as you listen for God's voice and his Spirit saying, this is the way, walk in it, it will transform your life. You don't have to be that grabber any longer, but rather you can be the one who trusts, who rests in the promise that God gave to Jacob. He said, Jacob, I'm not going to fail you. I'm not going to forsake you. I'm going to be there with you. Don't wait until the end of your life to discover that truth.